She's a sweet girl, Bertram Calender, 66-year-old patriarch and founder of Calender Development Group, said to the cluster of investors surrounding him. He gestured loosely in Zora's direction without quite looking at her. Simple, quiet. Not exactly what I imagined for Pierce, but harmless. Then he lifted his glass toward the tall windows of the Renault Grand Ballroom and said the part that made Zora set down her champagne flute very slowly. Now, Orison, that is a name worth having in your corner. That is real taste. When I finally land that partnership, everything changes for Calender. Zora Faris Calender, 37-year-old wife of Pierce Calender and founder of Orison, touched the small gold ring on her right hand, her mother's ring, and said nothing. That was the night of Bertram Calender's 40th anniversary gala for Calender Development Group. The Renault Grand Ballroom had been dressed in ivory and brushed brass, flowers in arrangements so large they blocked sightlines between tables, a jazz quartet in the far corner, men in dark suits holding drinks that cost more than most people's car payments. It was exactly the kind of room Bertram had spent 40 years trying to earn a permanent place in. He had almost made it. Almost, as Zora knew better than anyone, was not the same as there. She had arrived beside Pierce Calender, 39-year-old husband of Zora, the way she always arrived at his family's events, quietly, wearing something understated, a deep navy dress without flash, her dark hair pulled back, the small gold ring, and nothing else for jewelry. Bertram had kissed her cheek at the entrance. Pierce had drifted away from her by the time the second toast began. Kira Dunn, 30-year-old lifestyle consultant and Pierce's companion for the past year, stood near the bar in a dress the color of winter roses. She did not try to hide. That was the thing Zora had noticed about Kira across 2 charity events. She never pretended. She simply smiled and let her presence say the rest. Zora had learned about the affair 6 weeks earlier. She had not confronted Pierce. She had not cried in front of anyone. She had called Meredith Oakes, 47-year-old attorney and one of 3 people in the world who knew exactly what Zora owned, and said, "Tell me what I need to do and what I need to wait for." Meredith had said, "Wait for him to show you who he is in public. That's when the law starts listening." So Zora waited. She had been waiting longer than 6 weeks. She had been waiting through 4 years of marriage, through dinners where Bertram explained the luxury market to her, as if she were a student who had wandered into the wrong classroom, through Pierce's gentle and consistent way of steering conversations away from her whenever they moved toward anything she actually understood. Through every moment, Orison's name came up at the table, and neither man thought to ask what she thought of it. Orison had begun as a sketch on the back of a paper bag. That was the honest version. Zora's mother, Delia Faris, had spent most of her life working in textiles restoration, the careful, invisible work of preserving antique fabrics for museums and collectors who rarely knew her name. Delia had believed in quality that did not announce itself. She used to tell Zora, "The best things in a room don't call for attention. They earn it slowly, the way everything real does." Delia died when Zora was 26. She left behind 3 things: a small insurance policy, a collection of handwritten notes on craft material, and a sketch, faint pencil on brown paper, of a leather portfolio with hand-stitched edges. Just an idea. Something Delia had imagined for clients who could afford objects that lasted a lifetime. Zora had built Orison from that sketch. 11 years later, Orison was a luxury brand recognized in 12 countries for its handcrafted leather goods, boutique interior certifications, and limited edition lifestyle collections. Its signature document portfolio, the Delia edition, carried a 2-year waiting list. Hotels competed for the designation of Orison partnered property. Collectors bought its pieces the way other people bought original art. And Bertram Calender had spent 3 years sending formal partnership requests to Orison's executive office. Each one had been declined. Each one had landed in Nell Prashad's inbox. Nell Prashad, 41-year-old senior operations director, who reported directly to Zora. Zora had never told Pierce. In the beginning, she had tried. 6 months into the marriage, she started to say it at dinner. A Thursday pasta, rain on the kitchen window. Pierce had been laughing about something his father had mentioned. "Dad's convinced this Orison brand is his big score," Pierce said. "I keep telling him. Those boutique design houses only deal with old money. They're not going to take meetings with a regional developer." He said it fondly, the way you speak about a harmless ambition in an aging relative. Zora had looked at her pastor. She did not say the thing she had started to say. She told herself she would find the right moment. The right moment kept meeting the wrong version of Pierce, the version who said, "You don't have to worry about the business side of things, and it's good you have your work, keeps you grounded," without ever asking what that work actually was. He knew she was involved in design. He knew she'd traveled. He had never once looked at her business card. She had hoped love would ask the questions that status never thought to. It hadn't. 3 weeks before the gala, something cracked. Nell forwarded a document flagged by Horizon's legal team, an application from a regional lender seeking to verify Horizon's endorsement of a commercial real estate portfolio. The portfolio belonged to Calendar Development Group. The documents claimed Horizon had certified the interiors of 4 Calendar hotel properties as official Horizon-partnered spaces. The documents carried an Horizon authentication seal. Horizon had never certified any Calendar property. Those seals had never been issued. Zora had studied the documents for a long time before handing them to Slade Heron, 52-year-old legal director of Horizon. "Don't contact Calendar yet," she said. "I need to understand how far this goes." That same week, a charge appeared on Pierce's personal card, a private dealer. An item described as an Horizon signature piece, private acquisition. The amount was not the problem. The description was. Horizon did not sell through private dealers. Every piece was traceable through their own network. If something was being described as an Horizon signature piece through a back channel, it was either stolen or copied. Zora placed the receipt beside the lender's documents and looked at both together. One thread was a mistake, 2 threads were a pattern. She called Meredith that night. Then she called Hugh Farwell, 54-year-old authentication expert, who had worked with Horizon's security team for 7 years and who knew every production detail of every piece the brand had ever made. Hugh confirmed he could attend the gala. Calendar Development had donated antique furnishing pieces to a charity auction running alongside the event, and Hugh had standing as a valuation consultant for exactly that kind of work. No one would question it. Zora said, "Be there." On the night of the gala, Pierce moved through the room the way he always moved through his family's events. Loosely, confidently, slightly apart from Zora without seeming to have arranged it. Kira stayed near the bar for the first hour, near Pierce for the second. Bertram delivered a speech that ran 22 minutes and included Horizon's name 4 separate times. Each time, Zora watched the guests at her table glance at her to see if she was following along. She was following very carefully. Then Pierce appeared at her side, near the edge of the room, holding a flat box the color of slate. Enough guests stood within easy earshot to constitute an audience. Zora understood this was not accidental. "I wanted to give you something real this year," Pierce said. She took the box. Inside was a leather portfolio, dark cognac, hand-stitched edges. The Horizon monogram pressed into the lower corner. At first glance it was beautiful. She lifted it from the tissue paper and felt the weight, ran her fingers across the stitching, turned to the inner clasp. Her fingers knew before her face did. The leather was close. Not cheap, genuinely good leather, but it was not Horizon leather. Horizon sourced from 2 tanneries in Italy. The grain under her fingertip ran slightly too uniform. The stitching was 3 millimeters too wide. The monogram's second letter carried a different press pressure, subtle enough that only someone who had approved every production run for 11 years would feel it, and the interior pocket. Every authentic Delia edition portfolio carried a hidden seam on the left side that served no structural purpose. It was Delia's mark, something Zora had added at the original design stage, so she would always know her mother's piece from anything that imitated it. The seam was not there. "Do you like it?" Pierce asked. "It's lovely," Zora said. Bertram appeared at Pierce's shoulder, glass raised. "That's an Horizon, son. Now that is a real gift. Maybe your wife will finally understand what quality actually looks like." He laughed warmly at his own joke. Kira, 3 steps to Pierce's right, smiled into her champagne. Pierce lifted his glass again. His expression shifted into something he had clearly rehearsed. "Since everyone's together," he said, "I think it's time to be honest. Zora and I have grown in different directions. I'm asking for a separation." The space around them contracted. The quartet kept playing 2 tables over, but in their immediate circle the air stilled. Pierce continued. Something about honesty, alignment, the kind of partnership that required shared vision. His eyes moved to Kira for less than a second. That second was enough. No one moved toward Zora. A woman she had lunched with 3 times looked at the floor. Bertram watched his son with something close to approval. The room was full of witnesses. That was precisely what Pierce had wanted, and precisely what Zora had spent 6 weeks waiting for. She waited until he finished. Then she said quietly, "Before I respond, I'd like to have this piece authenticated." Pierce laughed. "Zora, come on." "The portfolio," she said. "I'd like it authenticated. Is that all right?" He spread his hands. "If it makes you feel better." Bertram made a loose, dismissive gesture. Let her have her moment. A chair moved near the auction display. Hugh Farwell rose, buttoned his jacket, and crossed the room with the measured walk of someone performing an unpleasant task with precision. He introduced himself as the evening's valuation consultant for the charity pieces, which was true, which no one questioned, and asked if he might examine the item. Zora placed the portfolio on the table. The room went quiet in a different way than before. The quartet slowed without stopping. Waitstaff stayed where they were. Hugh worked without performance. He examined the leather grain. He checked the stitching gauge with a thin tool from his inner jacket pocket. He opened the interior pocket and ran 2 fingers along the left seam, and his stillness changed in a way only Zora noticed. He looked at the authentication card inside the box, entered its serial number into a small verification device, and waited. Pierce shifted his weight. Hugh finally spoke, calm, clear, impossible to argue with. "This piece is not authentic orison." The room did not erupt, it compressed, like a breath held too long. "That's impossible," Pierce said. "I paid." "The leather is not from Orison's sourcing network," Hugh said. "The stitching gauge falls outside production specification. The monogram press is a close approximation, but not within tolerance, and the interior marking present on every authentic Delia edition is absent." He set the portfolio down. "This is a well-made copy, but it is a copy." Bertram stepped forward. "That authentication card looks genuine to me." "It is not genuine." Hugh turned it over. "The serial number belongs to a piece currently held in a private collection. This certificate has been duplicated." He paused. "This is not the first duplicated Orison certificate our office has encountered attached to calendar-affiliated documents." The temperature in the room dropped without anyone touching a thermostat. Meredith Oakes stood from her table near the east wall, picked up her leather folder, and crossed the room without rushing. Pierce watched her approach. "Why is your attorney here?" he asked. Zora didn't answer. She was watching Kira, who had taken 2 small steps backward and stopped smiling. Meredith addressed Pierce with professional evenness. "From this point forward, all communication regarding separation, shared assets, and any matters involving Orison's intellectual property will be handled through proper legal counsel." She opened the folder. "And Mrs. Farris' calendar has authorized Orison's legal team to cooperate fully with whatever investigation the certificate discrepancies require." "Mrs. Farris," Pierce stopped himself. Zora looked at him. In front of the room he had assembled to watch her diminished, she did not look away. "There's something you should both understand," she said. She looked from Pierce to Bertram. "My professional name is Zora Farris. I founded Orison 11 years ago. I am its majority owner and its chief executive. The company your father has spent 3 years attempting to partner with is mine. The brand you used to embarrass me tonight is mine." She let a beat pass. "And the Orison authentication seals on the lender documents Bertram submitted for the Calendar Hotel portfolio, seals that don't exist in our records, are something our legal team will be discussing with your financial institutions beginning Monday." The silence that followed was total. Bertram stared at her the way a man stares at a wall that has just moved. He looked at Pierce. He looked back at Zora. Pierce said, "You never told me." "You never asked," she said. "You decided what I was, and you stopped looking." She remembered a dinner 2 winters ago. She had come home from a board meeting that had moved $50 million, and Pierce had asked if she was tired from her design stuff, and offered to order food so she wouldn't have to think. She had smiled. She had said yes. She had let him order. She had made herself smaller than she was because she wanted love to be the thing that found her first, not the thing she had to justify. It hadn't worked. The evidence was sitting on the table in a tissue-lined box. Meredith placed a set of papers in front of Pierce. The separation agreement, the infidelity clause applies. The public statement clause applies given the circumstances of this evening. Orison reserves full rights to pursue civil claims related to the misuse of its brand and authentication documentation. Pierce stared at the pages. Slade Heron appeared at the far end of the room. He had arrived quietly in the last 10 minutes and stood near the door holding his phone. Orison has provided all relevant documentation to Calendar Development's primary lender. Their compliance review begins tomorrow morning. Kyra was moving toward the exit. A cluster of guests blocked her path without meaning to. Zora did not call after her. There was nothing to say to Kira that the next several months wouldn't say better. The gala ended without music. It ended with coats collected, voices kept low, the quartet packing their instruments before anyone asked them to. Hugh sealed the portfolio and its certificate into an evidence envelope. Meredith was on the phone. Slade had his laptop open in the hallway. Nell had sent a message. Lender compliance team confirmed receipt. We're on record. Zora stood alone for a moment beside the dessert table. The anniversary cake sat untouched, white fondant, gold script, 40 years of calendar development across the top. She looked at it, without grief, without triumph, just looked, the way you look at something that has finally become what it always was. She thought of the fake stitching on the portfolio, how close it was, how someone had clearly studied the original, measured every visible detail, tried to replicate the surface, and still gotten it wrong in the ways that mattered most, because those ways were internal, structural, decisions made at the beginning, before anyone was watching. That was the difference between a thing built with care and a thing assembled to look like it. Pierce called twice that night. She did not answer. On the third morning after the gala, he stood outside her office building, unshaven, holding his phone like it might help him. The confidence he wore at his family's events was gone. What remained underneath it was something Zora hadn't expected to feel sorry for, and then did. I didn't know, he said, about Orison. I genuinely didn't know. I know you didn't, she said. If I had known. Pierce. She stopped him, not harshly. The problem was never that you didn't know what I owned. The problem was that you decided what I was worth before you looked. You needed me to be something manageable. Something that didn't complicate the story you were telling about yourself. She paused. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a pattern. He was quiet for a long moment. I'm sorry, he finally said. She believed him. That was the part no one on the outside would have understood. She believed him completely, and it changed almost nothing. Apology was not the same as having chosen differently when it mattered. I know, she said. Take care of yourself. She went inside. Calendar Development's credit line remained suspended pending the financial review. Two of Bertram's long-standing investment partners requested audits of their shared ventures. Pierce's name appeared on a personal guarantee he had signed years earlier without reading closely, and that guarantee was now attached to a financial investigation no amount of charm could negotiate around. The family wealth Pierce had used to measure her worth, used to justify his choices, used to tell himself the story of who deserved what, turned out to have been supported in part by inflated appraisals and forged endorsements, not all of it, but enough that everything had to be re-examined from the beginning. Zora had not done that to them. She had only stopped shielding them from what had always been there. 4 months later, Orison launched the Delia Fund, grants and legal support for women rebuilding professional stability after financial manipulation or public betrayal. The announcement was quiet, through existing channels, without a press event. Applications arrived within 36 hours. Within 2 weeks, more than 300 women had written in. Zora read everyone. The launch portfolio, a limited Delia edition released alongside the fund, sold out in under 4 hours. Orison donated 40% of the proceeds directly to the grant pool. The design press noted it was the most personal thing the brand had ever produced. Something in the craftsmanship they wrote felt different, more deliberate. Like the maker had put something real inside. On the evening the last piece sold, Nell sent a message. Your mother would have loved this. Zora stood alone in the Orison workshop after everyone had gone home. The machines were off. The work tables held the tools of precision. Small knives, steel rulers, thread the color of old honey. The leather on the cutting surface smelled the way her mother's studio had smelled when Zora was a child. Like something being made carefully, for keeps. She pressed her palm flat against the table, cool and solid. Bertram had spent 3 years trying to reach the person who owned Orison. He had bragged about it at dinners and investment meetings, at his 40th anniversary gala, to rooms full of people who had nodded with interest. He had used the brand as proof of his own sophistication. He had made his daughter-in-law sit across from him at those tables while he performed his admiration for her life's work, and he had never once seen her face. Pierce had told her more than once that he needed a partner who understood ambition. He had meant his ambition, his father's version, the borrowed, surface-polished kind that turned out in the end to be a very expensive copy of the real thing. The real thing had always been in this room. Zora picked up one last portfolio from the drying shelf, a piece she had made herself, by hand, the way her mother would have, and placed it in a box addressed to the first Delia Fund recipient, a woman who had started over at 38, with nothing but skill she had spent years making precise. A woman who had written in her application, I didn't know quiet people were allowed to start over. Zora sealed the box. Then she turned off the workshop light and walked out into the evening. The city was ordinary around her, indifferent and alive, and Zora Faris Calendar, who had been called sweet, called simple, called not quite right for the room, moved through it the way she had always moved through rooms that underestimated her, without hurry, without need of an audience. She had hidden her crown for love. She would not hide it again for pity. Some women are not diminished by the people who overlook them. They are made patient, and patience, when it finally moves, tends to move everything in the room. If this story reminded you that quiet women can still change everything, subscribe to Broken Oath Tales and leave a diamond in the comments, because loyalty should never be mistaken for limitation.